There's a lot of messed up prisons around the world, but I found this one to be the most disturbing. It's a fictional prison from the show ANDOR, and it's designed specifically for convicts that are assessed to be labor-worthy. It can hold up to 5,000 inmates, and they're grouped into these work teams. And day after day, they work together to assemble these mechanical parts, but no one actually knows what they're building. The genius part about this prison is that the control mechanism is built directly into the architecture. For example, these tungstoid steel floors can fry you, and it can even kill you. It's also designed to make the prisoners think that they're being constantly watched, and this idea of constant surveillance makes them incredibly obedient. And as we studied prisons more and more, a very disturbing idea started to pop up. The purpose of prisons is to detain people. Philosophically, it gets a little blurry when you start thinking about, if the purpose is to punish or to rehabilitate, but functionally, it's a place meant to contain prisoners and to keep the rest of society safe. But what happens when the architecture itself becomes the surveiller, the detainee, and the punisher? A portion of this video is sponsored by Milanote. This is the Panopticon. It's an architectural concept for prisons from the 18th century by the philosopher Jeremy Bentham. The word panopticon derives from the Greek word for all-seeing, and it's designed around a central watchtower where the guards can always have a view of the prisoners, but the prisoners can't see the guards. This creates the illusion of being constantly watched, meaning there's a higher chance the prisoners are going to behave and self-regulate. And the entire facility can be monitored by just a few guards. So it's not just physical containment, it's kind of a psychological control. And this complete erosion of privacy can lead to anxiety, paranoia, and a loss of dignity. Although this exact design was never implemented, we've seen variations of this concept all over the world. Most of these prisons were shut down, but I think this architectural typology solidified a broader social message and how society perceives prisoners. It suggests that surveillance and control are essential in managing criminal behavior, and it led us down a path that focused on punishment rather than rehabilitation. This is the sound of solitary confinement. This is where they send prisoners who are considered to be a threat to security or other inmates. It's an empty room, and the average size is something around 6 by 9 feet. It's mostly windowless without any views or sunlight. Prisoners spend up to 23 hours at a time, and for 1 or 2 hours a day, they're let out into another isolated area. And when you listen to stories of inmates who spent time there, what's amazing is just how quickly their mental state starts to deteriorate. And to understand why, let's take a look at another type of detainment. Everything in the room is white, including the floors, beds, clothing, lights, and even the food is white. The rooms are completely soundproof, and the lights are designed to remove any kind of shadows. It's called the white room torture. And it's a form of psychological torture using complete sensory deprivation, and it can leave permanent psychological damage. One political prisoner who endured white torture for 8 months couldn't even remember the faces of his parents. And that's because a normal brain needs interaction and activity for the cells to grow. And studies show that when you remove stimulation, the brain freaks out, and it can cause anxiety and depression. And because the brain is constantly trying to establish patterns, it can also lead to hallucinations. In fact, just 15 minutes of sensory deprivation can lead to anhedonia, which is the complete inability to feel pleasure. And of course, solitary confinement is not as controlled as a white room torture, but there's just so many parallels that it's kind of hard to ignore. Solitary confinement can also leave permanent psychological and physical damage. And despite the backlash from multiple human rights organizations, it's still a very common practice in prisons throughout the world, especially in the US. In all these cases, what's really interesting is that architecture is not used just for physical containment or functional necessity, but it's used for psychological dominance.
1-2. He seems to have an 818. Can you feel this? 4814. Avoid the 714 and the 2.
And I think this is where the dilemma is, especially for architects. architecture at its core is supposed to serve the public. It's actually ingrained in the profession, and it's even in the AIA's code of ethics. Architects must uphold human rights in all their professional endeavors and make the built environment accessible to all and respect the dignity of all people. Yes, we need prisons to protect the broader public from criminals, but the line becomes kind of blurry when the architecture is designed specifically for the purpose of causing harm to another human being. If you've been following this channel, you probably know that we use Milanote to organize all of our research. And they're also sponsoring this video. We use Milanote from the brainstorming, storyboarding to the final research, and pretty much for anything that needs to be organized visually. I've even created my own template boards with guidelines so that we can copy it over every time we start a new project. Some of our team is remote, so being able to share and edit the boards in real time during our meetings makes everything so seamless. It's replaced a lot of apps for us because it's super dynamic and simple. It's definitely improved my workflow, so I think it's going to help you as well, no matter what industry you're in. It's completely free with no time limit, so you can sign up using the link in the description. And let me know if you guys like it. This is considered to be one of the most effective prisons in the world, the Halden Prison in Norway. And when I say effective, I'm talking about the recidivism rate, which is the tendency for a convict to re-offend. Halden has a rate of 20% compared to the 76%, which is the average for prisons in the US. And of course, there's a whole lot of factors outside the prison environment that impact this number. And many prisons in the US are actually operated by private companies who make a profit from the prison population. So maybe there is an incentive to keep them in the system. But Halden's success is the result of actually a pretty simple idea. Normality, meaning the prison should resemble life outside as much as possible. They have workshops, music, and recording studios, a worship room. They even have a place where your family can stay overnight. As of 2012, Halden had 340 staff members for only 228 inmates. That's more than one per prisoner. Kind of the opposite of the idea of the efficient, automated control that we see in Narkina 5. But this prison is in Norway. So is it even a fair comparison? Norway has about a 1/60th of the population of the US. The incarceration rate is about 75 per 100,000 people, while in the US it's about 700 per 100,000, which is about 9.3 times higher than Norway. This also means Norway can spend a lot more money per prisoner. Norway spends around $127,000 per prisoner a year, compared to just $25,000 in the US. But actually, it wasn't always like this. Before the 90s, Norway also had a recidivism rate similar to the US, 70%. And a rising prison population. And in fact, it was because they found these to be so not cost-effective in the long run that they took a hard look at their approach. During this time, there was also more and more research coming out that talked about the limitations of prison models that are focused primarily on punishment. Also, there was just more awareness around human rights issues and more awareness around the treatment of prisoners. And the people actually start to push for something more ethical. And so all of this led to some major changes in their approach, where they went from a punitive model to a rehabilitation model. And that actually had a huge impact on the architecture. Most of these prisons fall into one of these categories, circular or the Panopticon layout, with a central watchtower and cells along the perimeter. Courtyard layout, with a structure encircling a central open area. Triangular layout, with triangular structures connected by a spine. Linear layout, with rows of buildings stacked along a central spine. X-shaped layout, with a cross-shaped form. And the radial layout, with branches that come off a central point. Apparently, they'd rotate the prisoners to these different arms, so they can never familiarize themselves with where they are. And the prison in ANDOR would fall into this category, but with the sleeping quarters at the perimeter. By consolidating all the facilities into a single continuous building, it maximizes efficiency because you can limit the circulation to just a few hallways, which means you can be a lot more efficient with your surveillance. In Narkina 5, this is taken to the extreme, and even the cells are stripped to the bare essentials and designed for maximum efficiency and control. All the basic amenities like beds, toilets, food, water are neatly compact in this cell. This unit gives you access to unlimited bland food, but if you're productive enough, you can be rewarded with flavor. There's a screen that displays the amount of days that's left in your sentence, and while there aren't any doors, there's sensors that ensure that there's only one person in a cell. Otherwise, you'll get fried. The sanitation areas are right before you enter the workroom, and all of this is to limit the amount of movement from work directly to your cells. But in this new model, the facilities are split between these smaller buildings, surrounded by a natural landscape. All of this is contained in this perimeter wall, kind of like a campus. This means they can move around, rather than being restricted to the same hallways day after day. But what does that mean for surveillance? Historically, security was achieved through the architecture. Through the spatial layout, with windowless walls, locks, fences, even cameras and CC systems. Let's call this static security, but it usually comes at the expense of creating spaces that are kind of inhumane. Narkina 5 prison, while it's very technologically advanced, it still operates on the principles of static security, which allows them to have this insane 1:100 guard to prisoner ratio. But despite all the rigorous physical and psychological control mechanisms, static security failed to spot the communication between the prisoners. And this was potentially an oversight on the architect, who maybe tried to add a little bit too much humanity to this prison. Technically, if we're strictly abiding by the principles of static security, these windows are not necessary. In fact, it became the fatal flaw of this design, because allowing them to look outside, the inmates could get a sense of the scale of the prison and understand just how many of them there were, and maybe even start to communicate with each other. So without a design that's 100% bulletproof, static security has some major limitations, especially because it can antagonize and potentially provoke the inmates. But in Halden and in the other humane prisons that we looked at, they've come up with a layer of security that's invisible, that allows them to reduce the amount of static security. At Halden, they call this dynamic security, but essentially, it's the relationship between the inmates and the staff, created intentionally through workshops and activities. But it only works if we flip the role of the architecture, from a surveiller to a facilitator. By breaking up the massing and creating a diversity of spaces, you facilitate movement and interaction. By using colors and warm materials, it helps regulate mood and create a sense of comfort. By placing windows strategically for daylight and even views onto the cells of other inmates, you reduce stress and improve mental health. They can track the days and the seasons, and it gives the inmates a psychological connection to the outside world. In this very constrained environment, the prisoner actually builds a very intimate relationship with their space, and it can either facilitate growth or lead to a complete decline. And beyond this, I think our approach to prison says a lot about us as a society. Do we believe in the potential for change in every person? Is there room for dignity and healing and redemption, even for the worst criminals? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments.